Thank you very much. Mr. Cregor.
So, Councillor Jackson, on behalf of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, one of the legal organizations involved in filing Morgan v. Hennigan, the Boston school desegregation suit, I want to offer our thanks for your choice to hold this hearing today. This is critical, especially, as was noted before, on the 40th anniversary of Morgan v. Hennigan and the 60th of Brown. I come to this work after 4 years with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, where we served as counsel of record for 100 of the nation's 200 school desegregation orders that are still active. And as we look at what is happening in Boston, I see a similar story to things that we saw in other places across the country, which also encourages me that it's something that we can fix. To be blunt, I don't have enough gray hairs to know about this issue the way that Bob Marshall or George Cox or Donna Bivens or John Mudd know about it, and I have too many gray hairs to know what students see every day in the classroom right now when it comes to teacher diversity. But fortunately or not, this aspect of Morgan v. Hennigan was one of the most fiercely litigated pieces of the school desegregation case in Boston, and there's a record littered with information about this battle over the last 40 years. So to be very clear first on what the Garrity order holds for teacher diversity, the final order in Morgan v. Hennigan went into effect 20 years ago and required Boston Public Schools to achieve and maintain a desegregated faculty, and this, as has been noted before, required a faculty comprised of not less than 25% black teachers and 10%, in the words of the order, other minority teachers. The order allowed BPS to make progress toward this goal at a set and incremental rate, not less than 0.5% annually for black teachers. The order required BPS to preserve the same proportions of faculty diversity if it engaged in any reduction in force, and the order authorized BPS to target a sufficient number of faculty positions for black and other minority persons in order to work toward these 25% and 10% goals, respectively. The order allowed these provisions to expire once black and other minority faculty attained enough seniority to ensure that if the district underwent a sizable reduction in force by 3%, the racial and ethnic proportions of the teaching force or the faculty would be substantially the same. So that is, once the force reached 25% black teachers and 10% other minority teachers, even if there was a layoff of 3% of the teachers, the percentage of black teachers would be substantially the same in the eyes of the superintendent. This is 20 years ago, but it's incredibly relevant today. As I said, this is one of the 200 desegregation orders that is still active across the country. And in the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of changes when it comes to desegregation. We've seen a national push to get out from under court supervision of school desegregation orders. The goal, as announced by the Rehnquist Court, was to restore state and local authorities to the control of the school system that is operating in compliance with the Constitution. The Supreme Court has spoken on this further, encouraging partial transfer of school desegregation orders back to district control, where they see a degree of compliance, particularly full and satisfactory compliance with the matters that are up for transfer. And, you know, as we know, Boston underwent a significant amount of this transfer already back in the 80s and 90s over things like student assignment, transportation, school discipline, and other factors. But Judge Garrity preserved control over teacher diversity because this was an area where Boston Public Schools continuously failed to meet its goals. It wasn't just Judge Garrity who was doing this, but the First Circuit Court of Appeals, because they had a number of opportunities to reverse Garrity on this point, and they never did. The Boston Teachers Union, and I should note, not BPS always, but primarily the Boston Teachers Union, in the last series of suits that made its way up to the First Circuit under Morgan v. Hennigan, unsuccessfully appealed the teacher diversity aspects of the Garrity order several times. The last time they did this was in 1990. At the time, Boston's teaching force was 23.8% black, slightly better than it is now. And in effect, in their argument, and this is not on Jessica Tang on our friends at the BTU of today. But in effect, the argument was that this was close enough in the eyes of BTU, but it was not close enough in the eyes of the First Circuit. Perhaps what's most important about what the First Circuit said in its affirmance of the Garrity order at that point was what they said next. The Boston Teachers Union, in filing and appealing, argued that Garrity's teacher diversity provisions were of indefinite duration because the order would require that they remain in effect until teachers of color achieved significant seniority. And the First Circuit disagreed with BTU's analysis. And in essence, this is how they characterized their argument. It said, the BTU would thus have us rate achievement of the 25% goal as judges at a track meet of a pole vault or a high jump event. How high one goes, not how long one stays, is the sole criterion. This statement from the First Circuit is critical because it explains why Garrity's order is still valid and is still being violated today. Even though Boston, for a handful of years, employed a teaching force that was 25% black, it failed to preserve this percentage of black teachers, suggesting that black teachers have never reached the level of seniority necessary to ultimately resolve Boston's desegregation order. And while it has been 20 years since the final version of Garrity's order was put into effect, we fully expect that the First Circuit would likely answer these questions in the same way today. Just to make a couple quick closing remarks, I want to echo something that I know I've heard from a number of folks in this room. Despite our defense of the vitality of the Garrity order, we and everyone here view this as a floor, not a ceiling, for what racial diversity in teacher hiring and retention needs to be in Boston. We know from reports by the groups like the Center for American Progress and others that this requires intensive, heavy relationship building, individual recruiting, non-traditional recruiting approaches like those mentioned by Kim Janey from MAC. We also know that this is something that not only takes commitment from a district, but is perhaps best served when private philanthropy is involved and encouraged to be involved in the process of supporting teacher diversity in a public school district. We would also look to the private sector for some lessons on bias training, not only for creating proper environments so that our teachers of color do not feel isolated racially or in a racially hostile environment in which they teach, but also to look more deeply at bias training when it comes to selection, evaluation, promotion, and retention. We understand that the latest research on implicit bias suggests that what we see when it comes to the decision not to retain or to fire teachers of color in Boston does not look that different than what we see about hiring and retention practices across the country. The lessons that are being learned there need to be applied here so that we see a swift reduction in the bias that we think is inherent in this reduction in teacher force. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank this distinguished panel.